There are moments in life when the everyday familiarity of home suddenly feels different, when a simple evening transforms, stirring up a mixture of comfort and disquiet that lingers in the air. This story unfolds on one of those nights, in a cozy, quiet home where a mother and her grown son, reunited for a weekend visit, find themselves at the intersection of cherished memories and the new distance that time has woven between them. As the evening settles and old routines take place, something subtle but unmistakable stirs, revealing uncharted depths in their relationship. It's a story about connection, nostalgia, and the delicate process of adjusting to change in relationships that, for so long, felt unwaveringly defined. It was a tranquil evening, the sun just beginning to dip behind the hills, spreading a warm amber light across our serene neighborhood. I was in the kitchen, putting together dinner as the gentle murmur of the radio filled the background. My son Eric had just arrived home from college for the weekend. There was a calm, reassuring vibe in the house, the type of peace that comes with familiarity. Eric had grown up so quickly. It felt like only yesterday he was a child following me around the house, asking countless questions about the world. Now, at 21, he was no longer the small boy I remembered but a young man, strong, self-assured, and at times unintentionally distant. The relationship between us had evolved as he matured, and it was something I was still adjusting to. Dinner was ready, and I called him from the living room. As we settled down at the table, I noticed the way he looked at me, different, intense in a way that made me pause. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just my imagination. We chatted about his courses, his friends, and how much he missed home. But the way he spoke, the way his gaze held on to mine just a little longer than usual, gave me a feeling I couldn't quite put into words. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie together, something we used to do all the time before he left for college. The living room felt cozier than usual, with dim lighting and soft cushions making it an ideal setting for a quiet night in. I couldn't recall the last time we'd had such a peaceful evening together. As the film played, I found myself glancing at him more often than I probably should have, noticing the way he had grown into his own person. He was no longer the child I'd raised but a man. And then, just as I was beginning to feel an odd sense of unease about the thoughts passing through my mind, he shifted closer to me on the couch. At first, I thought it was innocent, but then his hand brushed against mine, and a spark jolted through me. Something electric, something I knew I shouldn't feel. I withdrew my hand quickly, startled by the intensity of the moment. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, his tone soft, almost concerned. I looked at him, my heart racing, unsure of how to respond. "Nothing, honey, just a bit tired, that's all," I answered, trying to brush off the feeling and hoping he hadn't noticed the tension between us. But I knew something had changed in that moment, something we couldn't overlook. The boundary between mother and son had blurred, and although neither of us had crossed it, the air was dense with unspoken thoughts. We sat there in silence, the movie playing faintly in the background, but neither of us was really paying attention anymore. I stood up, telling him I needed to head to bed early, but as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts raced. I knew I couldn't let this sensation grow. I needed to keep my distance for both our sakes, yet deep down, I wasn't sure how. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. The events of the prior night replayed in my mind over and over. I tried to dismiss the feeling, convincing myself that it was all in my head. I was his mother, nothing more, nothing less. I loved him dearly, but never in a way that could be misconstrued. I was being irrational, I told myself. Eric was already up by the time I went downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee. He greeted me with a smile, as if nothing had happened. Maybe it truly had been nothing, just an odd moment that only I had noticed. I decided to put it out of my mind, at least for now. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile and trying to sound as natural as possible. "Morning, Mom," he replied, his tone casual and relaxed. I was considering going for a hike later. "Want to join me?" A hike. It had been ages since we'd done anything like that together. I hesitated, unsure if I should spend more one-on-one time with him after what I'd felt last night. But then I reminded myself it was just a mother and son spending time together. There was nothing unusual about that. Sure, I said. That sounds nice. Later that afternoon, we drove to a nearby trail, a place we'd gone countless times when he was younger. The air was crisp, the sky a vibrant blue, and for a moment, everything felt normal. We walked side by side, chatting about nothing specific. Old memories, his future plans, the usual small talk. I found myself laughing, feeling more comfortable around him, thinking perhaps I'd overreacted the previous night. But as we walked further along the trail, there were intervals where our conversation would pause, leaving a silence that felt heavier than it should. At one point, as we reached an opening with a beautiful view of the valley below, Eric stopped walking and turned to face me. "You've always been there for me, Mom," he said, his tone gentle yet serious. "I don't know what I'd do without you." There was something in the way he said it that caught me off guard, a vulnerability in his voice that made my heart ache. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, you won't have to worry about that anytime soon," I joked. "I'm not going anywhere." He didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped a bit closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "No, I mean it," he went on. "You've always been more than just my mom. You've been everything." I froze, the words hung in the air, weighted with meaning I wasn't ready to confront. I searched his face for some hint that he was just being sentimental, that this was just an innocent expression of affection, but there was something in his gaze, something that made my heart race again, just like the night before. "Eric," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "You know how much I care about you, right?" "Of course," he answered, stepping even closer. "I care about you too, more than you realize." My pulse sped up. This wasn't how a mother and son were meant to speak, to gaze at each other. My mind screamed at me to move away, to put some space between us, but my body felt immobilized. "I think we should head back," I said, my voice wavering. "It's getting late." But before I could turn, he reached out and softly took my hand. The touch was innocent enough, yet the way he held on, the way his thumb lightly brushed my skin, made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't ignore. "Mom," he said gently, his voice filled with something I couldn't quite name. I don't know how to put this, but I've been feeling something I shouldn't, and I think you felt it too." Panic surged within me. I pulled my hand away, stepping back, my heart thudding in my chest. "Eric, stop," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't mean that. You're confused." He looked at me, his expression a blend of confusion and hurt. "I'm not confused, Mom. I know how I feel, and I don't think you can deny it either." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't right. You're my son. We can't." I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt too perilous, too heavy to utter aloud. Eric took a deep breath, his face shadowed with emotion. I know it's not right, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either." Tears brimmed in my eyes as I struggled to keep my composure. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I had to stop this before it went any further, before we crossed a line we could never undo. "I'm your mother," I said, my voice breaking, "and I care about you, but not like that. I can't. We can't." The words lingered between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the pain in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. He nodded slowly, looking down as though ashamed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't want to make you uneasy." I swallowed hard, trying to hold down the overwhelming mix of emotions swirling inside. "It's okay," I said softly, though I wasn't sure it really was. "Let's just go home." The drive home was stiflingly silent. Eric didn't say a word, nor did I. The weight of what had been expressed on the trail hung heavily between us, making every second feel excruciatingly long. I kept my eyes on the road, my mind spinning as I tried to process what had just unfolded. I couldn't believe the words that had left his mouth, the feelings he had revealed. It was as if everything I thought I understood about our bond had been flipped upside down. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Eric muttered something about going to his room. I didn't stop him as he disappeared up the stairs. I sank onto the couch, my body trembling with the emotions I had been holding back since that moment on the trail. I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. He was my son, my baby boy, yet he was no longer a boy, and it was becoming terrifyingly clear that our relationship had taken on a complexity neither of us had anticipated. I wanted to believe that his feelings were just a phase, something temporary that would fade with time, but the way he had looked at me, the way his hand had lingered on mine, suggested otherwise. Part of me felt guilty, as if perhaps I had done something wrong, maybe been too affectionate, too close over the years. But that wasn't right, was it? Mothers were supposed to love their sons, to care for them, to support them. That's all I had ever done. But now everything felt shadowed by the strange tension that had grown between us, and I didn't know how to mend it. I spent the rest of the day trying to avoid him, keeping myself occupied with chores and anything that could distract me from the confusion I felt. By the time evening arrived, I was emotionally exhausted. I didn't want to confront what had happened, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Eric and I couldn't continue like this, pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. That night, after I had spent hours tossing and turning in bed, I heard a knock at my door. My heart sank. I knew it was him. "Mom, can I come in?" Eric's voice was soft, almost hesitant. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to say no, to create some distance between us, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him. I had to face this, no matter how uncomfortable it made me. "Come in," I said quietly, sitting up in bed and pulling the covers around me, as if they could somehow shield me from the emotional storm that was about to unfold. Eric stepped inside, looking as conflicted and uncertain as I felt. He stood at the edge of the room for a moment, not quite sure what to do with himself. After a few seconds, he sat down on the edge of the bed but kept his distance. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice weighted with regret. "I shouldn't have said what I said earlier. I don't know what came over me." I nodded slowly, trying to find the right words. "I know this is confusing," I said. "But what happened earlier, that can't happen again, Eric. We have to be careful. This isn't the way things are supposed to be." "I know," he whispered, his gaze downcast. "But it's so hard, Mom. I don't understand why I feel this way. I've tried to push it away, but it just keeps coming back." His words struck something deep within me. I felt an intense sadness for him, for both of us, really. This wasn't a situation I had ever pictured myself in, yet here we were, caught in a tangle of emotions that neither of us knew how to unravel. "I'm your mother," I repeated, my voice soft but steady. "That's all I can ever be. You understand that, don't you?" He looked at me, his eyes heavy with hurt, but he nodded. "I know," he said. I don't want to lose you." "You're not going to lose me," I reassured him. "But we need to establish boundaries, Eric. This is risky ground." For a moment, there was silence between us, the tension from earlier in the day still lingering. Yet there was also an unspoken awareness that things couldn't continue as they were. We both understood, even if neither of us wanted to fully admit it. "Maybe it's best if you go back to school tomorrow," I suggested softly. "I think we both need a bit of space to clear our thoughts." Eric nodded slowly, though I could see the sadness in his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe you're right." The next morning, I watched as he packed his things, the air between us thick with unspoken emotions. I wanted to hug him, to tell him that everything would turn out fine, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, not after everything that had happened. When he finally left, the house felt emptier than it had in years. I sat on the couch, staring out the window, trying to make sense of everything. I knew we'd both made the right decision by putting some space between us, but that didn't make it any easier. The relationship between mother and son was supposed to be simple, pure, yet ours had become something far more complicated, something neither of us knew how to manage. As the days went by, I tried to settle back into my usual routine, but it wasn't the same. The house felt too quiet without Eric, and I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. I wanted to believe that the distance would help, that it would give us both the space needed to sort out our feelings, but deep down, I knew that things would never go back to the way they had been before. Something had shifted between us, something we couldn't undo, and I wasn't certain what the future held for us anymore. Thank you for watching and listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.